I think Beto's here.
Beto's here.
Yeah.
Here?
Mm-hmm.
Let me find him. There he is. Oh wait, I guess it doesn't matter. Welcome, Beto.
Hello, Joy. How's it going? Good to see you, Christine and Prophet Lara.
Good to see you too.
Likewise, Beto. And hi, Christine. Hi, Joy.
Hello, hello.
Hey.
Let me make sure. Am I recording now? I'm recording. Great. Okay, welcome everyone. Today's our panel is on public sociology beyond the election. We want to have the Sociology Club wanted to host this discussion just to open up our imaginations, I guess, beyond all the focus on the vote tallies, and everyone is still sort of at the edge of our seats waiting for all of the votes to be counted. So today's panelists, we have Dr. Eduardo Lara, who's professor of sociology at Cal State Long Beach. We also have Dr. Christine Petit, who's the executive director of Long Beach Forward, who as an organization, their mission is to create a healthy Long Beach with low-income communities of color by building community knowledge, leadership, and power. We also have Norberto Lopez, project director with Long Beach Residents Empowered, or Libre, which is a grassroots organizing group advancing justice in disadvantaged communities through creation and preservation of affordable housing, rental protections, and community economic development. Welcome, panelists. So everyone who is on this panel is studied in sociology, has degrees in sociology, right, or is teaching in sociology. And we wanted to, so many sociology students, as I'm sure the majority of our audience today, are either taking sociology classes now or are sociology majors, have a sort of general interest and enthusiasm in social issues. And generally what I hear is, I want to help, I want to do something positive, I want to improve the world, right? But working through, how do I do that, right? What does that mean specifically? And are there jobs or careers or titles that I can aim for, right? That can help me achieve those goals. So I think this panel will be a good sort of point of reference for everyone who's asking themselves those kinds of questions right now. So if we could have each of the panelists, please tell us a little bit about your educational background, any areas of emphasis, as well as the current work that you're engaging in maybe 5 minutes or less. And if we'll just go in order with who arrived to the meeting first. Dr. Petit.
Well, hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today. I have to admit, I was a little like, I'm going to be on a panel discussion the day after Election Day. I don't know how that's going to go. But it is nice to be here in community with you all and to see fellow organizers and folks in the community and sociologists. So my name is Christine Petit. I am the executive director of Long Beach Forward. So we're a movement building support organization in Long Beach, really focused on racial and economic justice. And we focus on a range of issues, from immigrant rights to housing, to environmental health, to schools, defunding the police in terms of our work around the city budget, and a whole host of other things. And really at the core, it's about ensuring that people have a voice in the decisions that are made. And so, yes, we're in the midst of a presidential election in terms of having the votes counted, but there were a number of local LA County and city elections that are really important to us. And the work that we do, is certainly important beyond that. So I started out as a psychology major. Actually, I started out as an English major way back in the day. But I got my bachelor's in psychology, and I think I was really drawn to psychology because I wanted to kind of figure out like my own family, my family dynamics, the world, kind of from that interpersonal place. But as I expanded my understanding of the world, I realized that it's not just about kind of our individual experiences and perspectives, like that sociological context where we grew up in society, the opportunities that we've had, our race, class, gender, everything about our background really shapes our opportunities and kind of the social structures that we see and how we see that play out. And so really, for me, I grew up in Oregon and I came to LA. I went to Cal State LA when as an exchange student. So I was supposed to be there for 9 months, and I've been now in Southern California for 20 years. So I've definitely kind of crossed that threshold where I consider myself a Californian. But coming to Los Angeles and kind of the East LA area in particular, I met people from all over the United States, from all different backgrounds, and that really kind of shaped my understanding of the world and helped shift me into sociology and helped shift me into activism as well and being an organizer. First kind of at the campus level, then a union organizer, and now a community organizer and community leader. And my areas that I focused on in school were really social movements. So the anti-war movement, which is what I became very active in as a college student, the war on Iraq and organizing against that. So, you know, I'm dating myself a little bit, but I was in college when September 11th happened. And that was a big piece of my organizing. So I studied the anti-war movement and then also studied issues related to race and class inequality and social movements for immigrant rights and social movements in around policing, actually. So I did my PhD, my dissertation work with an organization in Los Angeles called the Los Angeles Community Action Network. And it's an organization of houseless folks and very low income folks in the Skid Row community organizing for their basic civil rights. And they're still a very active organization, who've been active, you know, in the elections now, but also just the day-to-day work of making the community a better place. So for me as a sociologist, it's always been important to bridge community work with my understanding of the world. I think I'll stop there and pass it over, but like I said, it's good to be here with you all.
Thanks so much for that. Dr. Eduardo Lara, could you tell us a little bit about your background as well?
Always guilty of that mute button. I think it's quite common. I was started to say just hi to everyone and thank you to Joy for not only inviting me, but my not only fellow panelists, but friends. I mean, we've known each other for quite some time, and I think this is a great dynamic group to put together and get to know fellow students. And I hope this is really, hopefully it'll develop as a conversation with students in addition to some of our own comments. In terms of my background, I've been at Cal State Long Beach for 10 years. In fact, that's where I met Christine Petit. I was hired to teach some courses on race, class, and gender, but my background has really grown over the years. I teach a course on immigration. I've taught social problems, which is an intro course, which many of you probably have taken at your community college. And I do a class called Social Order, Social Change, which is, I've designed it to be about social movements. In this particular semester, it has always had a focus on Black Lives Matter, but I've extended that theme throughout the semester, given what we have all either witnessed or experienced over the last couple of months. I thought it was really important to kind of build that even more strong within that class. So that's what I've been up to at Cal State Long Beach. I also advise a student group historically known to La Raza. They went through a name change recently. It's La Fuerza. Similar mission and goals, and they're still developing kind of where they plan to take this organization. But it's a Latinx-based student group, and I assist them when they can as their advisor. But because it's student focused, I really kind of leave it up to them, and they ask me what they need, and when I can, I give them, you know, my support. So a little bit more beyond the academics, I think that's important because what we've been through, at least for me, has really informed research projects, teaching, viewpoints, and what I've done in the community. I grew up in Santana, California, and for those of you who may not be as familiar with Santana, we're a very segregated community. It's predominantly Mexican-American, Chicano, Latinx, and I like to kind of put all those groups because they're not necessarily all the same groups, and that's important. And maybe that's a dialogue point that we can have later in this session. And I grew up with a very politically active family. I didn't necessarily know to call it that back then, but just to give an example, my abuelito, my grandfather, he read La Opinión, the newspaper, a lot, and always had political opinions on matters, and he would engage me in those discussions, but I didn't really even have the language in English, at least, to really kind of see that as political consciousness. But that's what it was at a very young age. And the same with my parents, my mom and dad, and my grandmother. And so those were the early seeds that I can look back at now and think, oh, that really had something to do with my development as a politically conscious person. And then by the time I got to college, I went to George Washington University on the East Coast. I wanted to experience something new, something different from my immediate surroundings. So I went to school very far away, which that in itself, I have tons of stories about that, maybe lecture for a different time or different discussion, or if it comes up again, I can definitely go into that. But what I want to say is that's where I discovered the discipline of sociology. I didn't even necessarily have that on my radar. I went to GW in Washington, D.C. to study physics originally. I really love the other branches of sciences as well. And then within a year, realized that it wasn't necessarily for me. And so I took a sociology course, I took a political science course, and I gravitated toward the social sciences. And my sociology department had actually two majors within the department. I believe it's fairly unique. So they had sociology and criminal justice, but the criminal justice was from a critical standpoint. And for the most part, the courses were taught by sociologists. And so issues like the over-incarceration of people of color, in particular African Americans, were really discussed in these courses. And I knew some of that information already, but to see it from an academic standpoint was very empowering for me. And so I don't know when it was because it was over 20 years ago, but maybe the second year, I switched my major, formally criminal justice, and started also working in the field of education as undergrad. Got my master's in education with a focus in language acquisition, taught for LAUSD, and then eventually, through other life experiences, wanted to continue my education. So I got my PhD in social sciences, comparative ed, and with a focus in race and ethnic studies. And then I've, have that background and was able to, land a job at Cal State Long Beach, and been very involved in different community projects. A couple of years ago, I participated with a couple of other community members in informing the Justice Fund, which is funds to earmarked to help support undocumented immigrants who unfortunately are facing deportation proceedings. So that's just an example, some of the stuff that you can do within the realm of public sociology is taking this knowledge and informing work out into the immediate community. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure other stuff will come up, but I'm going to pass on the baton to Beto. I don't know if it goes back to Joy and then Beto. So I want to respect the process here.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, Beto, if you could share some of your backgrounds with sociology as well.
Hello, everybody. Very happy to be here right after the election. Reminds me of 2016. When I was a college student then, actually, I was at Cal State Long Beach. And I remember the day after the election when Trump got elected, the first thing we did was, I was actually a member of La Raza, which is now known as La Fuerza at Cal State. But the first thing we did is we held space for each other. And we talked about it, right? We said, okay, this is our reality now. What are we gonna do? At that time, I was already third year in sociology, so I had all this like academic background on, systems and oppression and all these other things, and I was just like, and I had already been organizing for 3 years on campus, so I had experience with the organizing as well. So I was like, all right, where do we shift this energy, right? All these feelings of anger, disappointment, and frustration. Um, well, we took action. We didn't just leave it there, right? We didn't leave it at feelings or at words. We started demanding things from the university and started letting them know what we wanted, right? What would make us feel safe on campus, knowing that Cal State Long Beach was surrounded by many Trump supporters, right? There was like a report done by LA Times that showed how Cal State Long Beach was surrounded by red. And so, during my time as a student at Cal State Long Beach, I had already experienced a couple things, not just only with the police, right? But there was also a time where the campus police was involved in a deportation of a community member. And so being undocumented myself, it landed me in a position where I was like, what are we going to do here? Um, but so I'm not jumping around from place to place. I landed in sociology. I went into Cal State Long Beach in 2012 as a psychology. I wanted to be a psychology major. I thought, oh, I want to be a psychologist. I want to be able to help people with their problems, talk with them, understand them a little better. And then I took my first Psych 101. It was horrible. I hated the teacher, the professor, and I was just like, nah, this isn't for me. I don't want to learn about the brain. Uh, what is it that I want to do? So I talked to the counselor, and they're like, look, it sounds like you're interested in a lot of things. Let me put you in the sociology 101 class, um, and the criminal justice 101. And at that time I was like, oh, the sociology stuff is pretty cool. I actually like it, and it feels like it's my reality. It feels like this is what I've lived through, coming from a low income neighborhood. I live in South Central, and having gone to Crenshaw High School, very very underfunded school, and it was just like, this is my reality. This is what I know, being undocumented. Oh, what, they talk about that here? All right, cool. And surprisingly, I still didn't end up in sociology. I went into criminal justice thinking, okay, maybe we can change things from the inside. That was my mentality then. I then said, no, you know what? Criminal justice isn't for me. I did another major switch, and I ended up in sociology. And through my time in sociology, I took a course um, that it's a combined course with Chicano Latino studies. And then I ended up in Chicano Latino studies as well. So I ended up double majoring at Cal State Long Beach, graduated in 2017. I was a student organizer with La Raza, with Students for Quality Education, which is a statewide funded organization through the California Faculty Association. And so I was a student organizer there for 2 years. And then I had done a lot of internships in the community. I worked on what is now known as a WW campaign, but it was a Stand with Women Against Abuse campaign. Um, Big, huge campaign that lasted 4 years. It started when I was a college student, and it ended a year after I graduated. That's just to give some context. That was to give working women in the hotel industry panic buttons. And once I graduated from Cal State, I ended up at Housing Long Beach. I did a couple part-time gigs from May through December, and then I landed an actual job in December, but didn't start till January as a community organizer. And that's where my love for housing justice came. I learned a lot during my time at that organization. I then left the organization, or was let go due to funding, which is a very common thing in the nonprofit sector. Just a heads up for everybody. I'm being very transparent with everybody, just because I know that once you graduate, there's a lot of unknown and uncertainty that you feel. And I remember being in that place. And so once I left Housing Long Beach, I ended up doing the WW campaign, and we won. We were able to, this had to go all the way to the ballot because the city council failed to pass it multiple times. They didn't, some council members, men in particular, felt that it wasn't time and that it wasn't the right policy. And we ended up going all the way down to the ballot. We won the ballot. That job then ended. I ended up in San Diego for 6 months at a shelter assisting folks who, were being released by ICE. And in my situation, I'm a DACA recipient at the border, literally in San Isidro, like right next to the border, helping people, right, and seeing or not ICE agents, but CBP, Customs and Border Patrol agents on a daily, um, looking across the other side on my drive to work and seeing Mexico on the other side and knowing I can't go because if I go, I can't come back. Um, and that was my experience for 6 months out there. I then came back to Long Beach and continued organizing in a faith-based organization where I met Joy, which was a Greater Long Beach Interfaith Community Organization. And I was there for 6 months, and now I'm currently at Libre as a project director. And I literally just turned a year last week at that organization. And what we do there is advocate for tenant rights. And I think that during this COVID crisis that we're in and pandemic, housing has just been elevated. as being a big top priority issue for a lot of people. And talking about post the election, what does this mean beyond the election? It just goes back to proving that the uh, the rich, right? The rich class, the people who move things are still in control of a lot of the politics, and they tend to run a lot of the game. And sadly, we failed at Prop 21, we failed at Prop 16, which was affirmative action. We failed at Prop 15, which was gonna, change the way the taxes were on properties over $3 million. Um, and it just goes to and Prop 22, the Uber one, right? We see how much money they poured into these campaigns to continue, putting profit over people. And so beyond the election, and I'm sure we're going to get into the discussion, is what do we do? Is continue to organize, work together as a community. As students, you have a lot of power. You're in the academic setting, learning about all these power structures, and it is, our opportunity to go back to our communities and pass on the knowledge, because a lot of our people don't get that opportunity. But if they were exposed to what we've learned in the academic setting, we make a major impact on what we do. And understanding the language as well is a big thing. And so that's it for me for now.
Thank you so much for that, Beto. You touched on so many important things and a lot of things that I think students can relate to in terms of part of what is so exciting about sociology is that it sort of amplifies and facilitates that self-discovery process and self-understanding of like your own experiences and helping situate yourself. But then inevitably, as we all know, based on experience, we then end up turning that outward and trying to figure out how can I help other people reach this level of understanding through some kind of effective work. So you brought up a lot of important things. I want to now move so that we can get some definition of this idea of public sociology. For many students, it might be a brand new term. So I will share, as by the way, I would direct people to the chat as other resources are also being shared. Thank you, Dr. Lara, for sharing some links. But I want to just drop that video link to sort of a speech given at the ASA, right, by Dr. Burroway on this idea of public sociology, if you want to dig into it a little bit more. And so just to kind of outline primary components, right, he looks at sociology as being divided kind of into 4 sectors: professional, the one that we're more familiar with in terms of like the research side of things, writing journal articles, right, and discussing ideas and theories about social structure. There's critical sociology, right, which is going to criticize that process as well, the sociological process, and bring critical views. And then we've already kind of touched also on what he calls policy sociology, right? That's obviously a piece of this puzzle. And today's discussion goes hand in hand with really all of those. He talks about them as being very synergistic, right, as sort of working together. But I wanted to introduce this idea to students of public sociology. And so if you can, anyone would like to pick this up, how do you define it? How do you understand it? And how do you see yourself practicing that?
So I'm going to give it a stab here, if the other panelists don't mind, just, or maybe I love just organic conversations, but I sketched out some ideas that came to mind, especially given the work of Black Lives Matter, and some of my own observations, and maybe even work as an ally to the movement. I like this concept of reimagining, right? Specifically for them, reimagining public safety. But if we take the reimagining part and situate that in a larger context, reimagining, a more equitable society. And the other day I was listening to KPCC. I don't know if I highly recommend KPCC Public Radio in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. Just a lot of good journalism work, perspectives that you might not necessarily get in other outlets. But I forget which show it was, but there was a commentator who was interviewing educators who were tasked with the charge of figuring out what online education should look like and what would this look like when the pandemic hopefully subsides. And he invoked this idea of reimagination of schools that are to be more equitable, but he added the adjective, the radical reimagination. He talked to all the all the educators, says use the radical reimagination to rethink schools, and they all gave their 2 cents. But I said, wow, number one, the work of Black Lives Matter has been so extensive worldwide that they have now impacted culture and discourse and ideas. And now you see other outlets like KPC using this idea in their words of radical reimagination. And then I looked into the original discussion of public sociology, and there was a key phrase there that I like. The goal is to expose the gap between what is and what could be. And I think when you take that idea of analyzing our current inequalities in society and then having that data, reimagining it, we can push public policy, other thinkers, politicians, through social movements and other type of projects, so that the inside also starts to change. So I want to try to organically on the spot kind of marry those ideas together, because we are living through a very, very key moment. I know that right now tension is high, anxiety is high. We're awaiting election results. Last night didn't go according to what some of the polls perhaps suggested, but it's still too early. We are still waiting. And so I think we need to be patient and think that there is a moment here that we need to seize on. And call me the ever optimistic here, but I think we need to be cognizant of a genuine thirst and authenticity for change in this country, in a way, as Beto mentioned and Christina, so how do we organize this in a way that's sustainable, in a way that is actually going to be significant, and then over the long term, actually make some of the changes that all of us definitely desire, right? So I'll leave it at that, and as food for thought, and I welcome any questions along the lines, maybe what my fellow panelists think.
I had some thoughts. You really took me back to grad school, Joy, because I think I might have seen Burway give that talk in 2004. But public sociology to me is about bringing sociology to people, outside of the university, outside of journal articles, outside of books that only grad students read, but like actually bringing sociological concepts to everyday people to help us make sense of the world. One thing that is interesting about being a sociologist, I think, is that we study society and we have different theories and we have research that helps to inform our perspective. But everyone we meet has some sort of opinion about society, whether or not they studied it, just because they live in it. So sociology is tricky. It's not like, oh, math, I'm going to show you this thing and this is the answer, or, some other fields of study. But sociology is like, we all have opinions about the society that we live in. So how do we actually help people have informed opinions about this world that we live in, that it's not just what you heard, from your parents, or not just from the school that you attended, but to start to understand kind of a broader perspective of society. So for me, it's about making these ideas that we talk about in sociology accessible. I love what Dr. Lara said about reimagining. The other thing is like, people live in society and are like, this is just the way it is. This is the way it is. Well, no, actually it was created. It was created this way through policies. It was created this way through our practices, through our culture, and it can change. And in fact, there are lots of examples of it changing. So how do we help people understand that and reimagine it? Those are some of the things I think about. And so like, Dr. Lara said, I met teaching in sociology. I also taught at Cal State Long Beach. And, I love being in the classroom. And I always encourage people to get outside of the classroom and see what's going on in the community around this campus. You know, what's going around in your neighborhood? How are decisions made? To me, it's really about grounding it in practice and getting away just from like theories and journal articles and stuff. You know, I find that people who study social movements are often kind of out of touch with how organizing actually happens. And you know, I'm someone who studied social movements, but I was also a union organizer and also really, you know, worked to kind of embed myself and be involved in different social movements. But, you know, just for example, people would say like, oh, poor people can't mobilize because there are too many barriers. This is a common sociological theory. And over, I saw that that's not true. Actually, it's a pretty paternalistic way of looking at people. But you see that people do organize, even when, you know, there's a lot at stake. And so, yeah, we can talk about barriers and things like that, but it's kind of getting away from, yeah, our common sense assumptions about things and actually looking at engaging with people.
My turn. This is a really good question, and you know, I'd like to say that public sociology begins with you and with us, right? Engaging in these conversations, and I believe that you know, public sociology starts with us understanding our own realities from the academic setting, in the sense that you know, once we start understanding and seeing that, yo, these people are doing studies on my community and what I'm going through, why can't I do that? And I think that once we start doing it, coming from a perspective of having lived it, I think that's when we really start creating a narrative that changes what sociology is. And I feel like that sometimes was one of the biggest clash I had within the classroom, was a lot of theory, a lot of talk, but no action. And that's why I was very critical of my own department at Cal State Long Beach, because I saw a lot of this conversations just staying in the classroom, but never leaving it or never opening it up for other people. And my critical lens on it was because of my own experience, not just you know being low income undocumented, but having been organizing in the community and seeing the struggles of the working class. And I think that to me, some of the theories that stick to me the most, you know, was Marx, right? Understanding that as a working class, we can come out of it and we have nothing to lose because we are already under everything, all these types of systems of oppression. And so I like what Christine has said. It's like we have to look at our own communities, our own neighborhoods, our own campuses, and understand what is going on there that is playing a barrier against us, and how can we start the discussion and then move into action. Public sociology occurs once we bring everybody in, and I think that the definition of everybody in has to come from those that are making the movement happen. Um, and so I think for me, I'm in a position right now where I want to understand more of housing, and I'm currently taking a course on it. And so, you know, I'm looking at what has affected housing, not just from, you know, racist policies, but how it works. And so I'm really learning and diving in. And one thing I would like to add also about public sociology is that you don't know it all, regardless of what school you went to, regardless of what article you've read, regardless of what book you've read. You learn every day from the people you engage in. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this career path that I chose and I made in my life. Um, and I wouldn't change it for anything, regardless of all the critique that came from home as well. Because what are you going to do with the sociology major was a very common thing. But it wasn't until I dove into it that I really learned and understood what I was getting myself into.
I love that. That I think one point that you've highlighted a couple times in different ways is this point that being college educated is a privilege, right? And so on the one hand, like as students, we need to appreciate that and value that. But also, you know, what I heard from Dr. Petit is part of the role of public sociology is to make these ideas and this information accessible to everyone who may not have access to that privilege, right? And also at the same time, Beth, though, as you said, you know, not getting stuck in sort of this hierarchy of academia being better than, right? I think it was another one of your colleagues at Cal State Long Beach, Dr. Osuna, you know, who also talks about how academia needs to be following the movements. Like the researchers, we need to be paying attention to what's going on the ground, which is exactly the point that's being made here. So now moving to the election, which I know like we could have our own 24-hour like news cable, right? A breakdown analysis of all the different things going on, from the use and misuse of identity politics to the problems with polling, the role of media. But I'm interested in what issues were you all particularly focused on, right? Given that, especially in a presidential year, people tend to only focus on that race, and then they get their ballot and maybe they're enthusiastic about that one vote, and then they look at the rest of the ballot and go, what is all of this? So what were you paying attention to, and what also could you share about maybe sometimes the danger of focusing too much on on elections themselves, or in particular like just the presidential election? That's for anyone who wants to start that one.
I mean, I was tempted to go first, but I went first last time, so I'm going to defer, and then I'll go fit myself in somewhere else.
I know, I was going to nominate Beto to go first.
All right, for sure. Yeah, I guess for the election this year, I was really focusing. I always focus in on the props. I try not to focus so much on the national. Um, Reason being that the local level, or the local elections, have a bigger impact on us compared to the national. And yes, although the presidential election does have a big outcome on what happens, I think that it's always down to us to really decide what is happening in our communities. And I was looking at the chat right now, and I was seeing some of the comments there. And like, we also have to look at what has put us in these communities. Um, what kind of policies have made these communities in this way, that there's this feeling of disinvestment, and that disinvestment leading to a lot of the problems that we see: the lack of resources, the lack of opportunity, and the lack of upward mobility, which tends to be a big issue. And it's a very racist issue. And so we had an opportunity to change it. Prop 16 was an opportunity to change it. Affirmative action, allowing people to look at race as one of the factors on a lot of determinations. And regardless of this state being so quote unquote progressive and democratic and blue, Prop 16 has currently failed at the moment. Who knows what happens as the ballots continue to come in, but as of right now, the margin looks too big to catch up. And then you look at Prop 15, an opportunity to reinvest in our communities. And there was a big movement of nonprofits, a big movement of foundations that were working to pass this prop a second time, right? Because it failed in 2018. So they brought it back in 2020 with the revised edition, and still it has failed. Why? Because corporate interest is so much, bigger, and they put so much money to protect their interests. We look at Prop 21, rent control. Across the state, it would give local municipalities the ability to pass rent control. What did the landlords and the developers do? Dropped a ton of money against it. And this is where I then go back to what plays a role in all elections. It's the media. The media controls the narrative on how we see things and how we see our realities. I look at my family, my own family, and I look at how much the news, right, play an impact in my family. Univision, Telemundo, they always exaggerate a lot of things, but it isn't until you're in front of that camera that you see how it happens. You try to say something in front of camera, they tell you no. How about you say this? And I'm talking about personal experiences around housing, and I wonder why. And it's also because big interests, right, play a role in these media outlets. And so at the end of the day, it's like focusing too much on one election distracts us from how how a lot of things play out. Um, but for me, I think some of the bigger elections were in Long Beach. Although I'm a LA resident, I've lived here, since I got here from Mexico. But I'm moving to Long Beach hopefully soon, and so I organize in Long Beach. Long Beach is like my my happy place, and I'm looking at the elections as they were coming out, and I didn't know what to expect. There were very nasty campaigns. It was the establishment against a conservative in one district. Then you had a man and a woman running against each other. And you look at the educational journey or the history or like of employment of the woman candidate, and she's more um, talented and has more qualifications than this male candidate, and yet still this male candidate won, regardless of what he has done in the past on his votes. But we look at the backing on who backed who, and we see why. So I think that politics have changed a lot, and it's become a more like what people like to critique. People like to critique our countries for quote unquote corruption, but we don't see the corruption playing out in our own backyard. We don't like seeing the problem in our own house. And I think that's the problem with American politics today.
I can share. Like, ooh, that was a lot. And I definitely feel you. For this election, I definitely focused, like the very first thing that I called for was Prop 15. So I'm definitely really sad to see that it's currently down and probably will not pass. But I thought Prop 15, well, the origins behind Prop 15 is something that I've been talking about with people since I was a union organizer over 10 years ago. And since we had a crisis in public education and kind of the organizing around that, around the last recession in 2008, 2009, and seeing how underfunded education is in California, and how a lot of that connects to the passage of Prop 13 40 years ago. And, Prop 15 was really about trying to make commercial property pay taxes, like pay a fair amount of taxes so it could go into our schools and communities. So this election cycle, what I tried to do was really like have no regrets. I'll say, like Beto, I'm not super focused on the national, though after 4 years of Trump, it definitely felt a lot more urgent to me this time around. I think it wasn't until a few weeks before the 2016 election that it sunk into me that Trump could win. And I'm someone who tends to think like, no matter who wins the election, president or any elected, there's always organizing work that's going to need to be done to continue pushing us toward justice. Like, especially at the national level, this system doesn't benefit most people, not the people that I care about in particular. And, it really was based on white supremacy and it continues to uphold it. That said, I'd rather try to negotiate that under Biden than Trump. And, so this time around, I did make sure that I, did some work around the national election, calling and texting into swing states. And I called for Prop 15 and I shared a lot of information about the different ballot initiatives that I cared about. And then I was very involved, well, as involved as I could be, I guess, in local city council races and school board. And so I think that's something that I would really emphasize to you all, as well as thinking about how decisions are actually made in your community and understanding a lot of times people will only vote in the national election, but they're not really paying attention to who is making decisions in their city, in their county, in their state, on their behalf. And I found that those folks, those local representatives, one, they have a big impact on our lives, like the day-to-day functioning of our city, the kinds of policies that we pass for workers, for families, for immigrants. Like, those are the kinds of fights that we've been having in our city council and at our school board for educational equity. So those local races make a big difference. And so that's something that I would definitely encourage you to, to start kind of understanding, if you don't how decisions are made in the local level. I will say the area that I'm encouraged is in criminal justice reform and in reimagining policing and reimagining community safety. Because you did see in LA County Measure J pass, so making sure that a percentage of the budget was allocated toward preventative services and community services rather than policing. And that's a way of starting to give funding to these underfunded services and programs that we've but chosen to rely on policing to deal with social issues rather than investing in our communities. So I'm really happy to see that in LA County Prop J passed, or Measure J passed. I'm really happy to see that in Long Beach, there was a Measure Us, and it's about, again, getting investment into youth development, into climate, and into racial justice, and taking that through an oil extraction tax so that oil companies have to pay when they're extracting oil from Long Beach, which is very centered around oil. And then other things around criminal justice reform is Prop 20. The state like overwhelmingly rejected Prop 20, which would have rolled back some of the loosening around laws in terms of what constitutes a felony. So there were propositions in the past, Prop 47 and Prop 57, which not decriminalized, but made things misdemeanors instead of felonies, and basically signaled a shift away from mass incarceration. And voters overwhelmingly upheld that right now in this cycle. So that's awesome. And also voters overwhelmingly approve the restoration of rights after people with felonies have served their time. So I think that's awesome. I know I saw someone in the chat who was disappointed about the cash bail vote. And I think everyone would agree that cash bail is absolutely devastating. It's an unfair system. However, there were many criminal justice advocates who were also opposed to it, or justice reform advocates who were opposed to it because of the algorithms based on racism and classism that would have not even given people an option to be out on bail. So that one's a toss-up, but I think it probably would have passed if not for people raising flags about, is this a better system to replace this with? Not necessarily. So I would say justice reform is the area that I'm encouraged about, things I've been paying attention to, but definitely some devastating losses. And I think people are just really sad this morning too, seeing 60+ million people voting for Trump as president. Not to assume everyone's politics on this call, but for people who are sad about that, it is this representation of white supremacy, of anti-immigrant sentiment, of misogyny. I know I was pregnant, during the last election, and I had a baby girl, and it made me very sad to think I was raising a daughter in this climate of misogyny and just in this world. So it's really personal for a lot of people too, myself included. So some rambling thoughts on the day after the election.
Joy, just to clarify, I got the second half of the question was what was I focusing on locally other than the president? Was there a first part too?
I think the second part was if anyone wanted to speak to the danger of focusing on electoral politics.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right. So I was following District Attorney Jackie Lacey versus Gascon, and last I checked, Gascon won, and that was a major victory. And again, the last time I checked, that
was the other
and
one.
It was significant, very significant. And that's a testament to the power of organizing and the overwhelming influence of Black Lives Matter, bringing attention to that. So we want to give credit where credit is due. And where, when we do focus and have attention and also invest in many ways, not just monetarily, we can get the message out and people will respond accordingly. So that was a win. In terms of a loss, Proposition 16. I did some work with my union, the California Faculty Association, and did a teach-in, and just to give some context or further context on Prop 16, in the 90s, Proposition 209 unfortunately passed by the electorate back then, and it essentially banned the use of race-based admission as a criteria and in contracts at the state level. And what we saw immediately, right, it was not a surprise to those of us who do this type of work, but the admission and subsequently the enrollment of students of color dropped. And my political beliefs are such that, our institutions of higher education should reflect equitably the racial ethnic makeup as one criteria. I mean, there are other demographics as well, LGBTQ, et cetera, but in this particular context, we're talking about race and ethnicity. And I think that they should be equitably, and this really dramatically impacted that. And so this would have, had it passed, it would have returned to an era where higher education could use race and ethnicity as part of a decision making for admission, with the goal to make things more equitable for students of color, because as perhaps many of you, I am confident in saying this, have faced a number of challenges in navigating higher education. And now you're here and there are still challenges, and many of you hopefully will transfer to a four-year institution. Hopefully Cal State Long Beach bias here, and then there can be challenges there. And I think this really would have helped fix an injustice that happened historically, but then be part of an overall, hopefully, plan to really try to take some of these racialized barriers for students of color. But it didn't pass. It didn't pass. And so now those of us who we've been doing this work, I think there's some tough conversations we're gonna have. And here's what's surprising. 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was some data shared with me that it might not have passed, but within 2 weeks ago, then it looked like it was inching closer. And then the last conversation I had in a meeting was that, it's looking good. It's looking good. It's not for sure, but it's looking slightly ahead, and it's looking good. And then the results that I saw that it was, the no's were pretty solid. So we need to kind of look at that and say, what happened? It might be this situation again where people report because it's socially more acceptable to say, yeah, I'm for this. But in reality, when they go into the ballot box, not vote for it. So, and that's actually kind of what we're seeing, play out with the presidential election as well.
Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing your reflections on the election. I wanted to actually, we have about 15 minutes left. I wanted to open it up to students. Any questions that you had for our panelists about the election, about sociology, about really anything at this point? We have a pretty big audience today, so feel free to drop your question in the chat if you'd like, or feel free to unmute yourself now and ask your question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I was just wondering, like, Biden's looking pretty good in the race right now, and if he wins, do you guys see like Trump supporters kind of disappearing into the background, or do you guys think they're still really gonna be there?
I would like to take a stab at this one if possible first. This is a very good question, right? This is where we start to see the reality of things. This is where we start to see people taking the streets, right? Not the people we want to see out in the streets, but there's going to be some pretty angry, pissed off people if Trump loses, right? And we live in a state where I think the right to bear arms isn't as public as in other areas where people are walking around with big old assault rifles and just walking like it's nothing. I think that here in California, we might not see as much as that. I think we might see what you're saying, people going in back into their little shadow hole and waiting for the moment to come back out. But we see these rallies, we see these car caravans, we see these boat parades for Trump, and that's a lot of people. I was out on a small trip to San Diego, and next thing you know, I'm out there about to catch a ferry, and then next thing you know, I see all the boats coming out. I'm like, what the heck did I? What? Where am I? And it was a big old Trump parade, boats, and it wasn't like hundreds; it was like thousands of boats. And these are wealthy people, and these wealthy people are the ones who drop money into politics. These are the people who own the corporations that some of us buy things from. But what are we gonna do? So as they go back into their hole, what does that mean for us? It means we have to seize the moment. But I think my biggest critique of everything is that regardless of who takes office, we can't trust them in the sense that during the Obama era when it was democratic all around, no such policies that had a big impact for immigration took place. Yes, DACA was given in 2012, right? But it wasn't just given because Obama said, you know what, I'm gonna give it to them or because I feel kind today. No, there was a ton of pressure that went into that. But then also the strategic move behind it is it's an election year. So I have to regain this seat again for another 4 years. So I'm gonna give the Latinos something, or the immigrant community in general, right? I'm saying Latinos because they play such a big role in elections in the sense that they're considered the quote unquote sleeping giant due to our growing numbers and the fact that a lot of the kids who couldn't vote 4 years ago can vote now. And during that time of Obama running for the seat again, goes to show that they are very strategic in the way they move and what they do. They could have easily given the citizenship if they wanted to all 11 million, and that could have guaranteed them the seat again in 2016 if they had done that. But why didn't they do it? And so I think my critique on what happens next, it's going to be exciting to see, especially in the red states. What happens to those people, right, that are Trump supporters and they won in their state, but now they're under a new Democratic presidency. So we'll see. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, but I think it's also going to have to go hand in hand with the COVID-19 pandemic right now and how this ends and when it ends too.
I have a question. I really always worry that I'm going to talk over someone, so I hope I wasn't cutting anyone off. I guess my question is about your part of your career experiences. I've just recently become interested in social problems, and I'm finding things that I really care about, and I'm looking to get politically involved. And something that I'm learning is that marketing and messaging seems to be really important. And that's something that I don't have a background in, and I didn't used to think it was important, and I don't have exposure in that area. So I guess my question is, do you find that that's true? And if yes, how did you learn that? Does it just come to you on the job, or someone teach you this stuff if you're part of a movement? Yeah, that's my question.
It wasn't something that I studied either. So in a lot of ways, I feel you, and I've been in this situation. And I don't even know I'm very effective because I didn't study it directly. But I think along the way, I've picked up on how to mess. So I'll give you an example. So in the academic world, right? We at least I was trained on how to appropriately frame ideas in writing. Like when you share something in an academic paper, your words and how you craft them together not only is a reflection of how clearly what you're thinking, but what you want to convey to a readership, right? And that's framing, and then you have the data, right, that supports, right, or that segues from the framing, and then you have the discussion. So you got framing, data, discussion. And it may not seem obvious, but in a lot of ways, right, that knowledge base, at least for me, has been very helpful in communicating outside of an academic context for social media, for example, right? Social media is a different audience, right? I sometimes I do blend kind of the academic in social media with, the colloquial, if you will, but framing is really what is your message? How do you want to what's your main idea? That's framing, right? But the words might change a little bit. And so I picked up on that transfer of knowledge from one audience to another, but also just observing, people who are experts in this and what I've been able to take away. And that's the learning process, right? When you learn and continue to learn, those skills transfer over to other areas and you pick up on things, and then it's just asking people, right? Asking people and getting feedback. And here's another thing, and this is hard, right? Taking feedback, taking constructive feedback and being okay with feedback so you can grow as a person. And I don't care how well educated you are. I don't care how good you think you are. I don't care where you're at in development. You can always be better. And for that, you need feedback. And you then also decide which feedback you want to incorporate in an area of development. In this case, you're talking about marketing, and which ones you don't, right? And also be true to your sense of self, right? Because feedback sometimes may not align with, your values sometimes in terms of what you want to put out there.
I could add a little bit. I put my email in the chat if anyone wants to connect, and then Long Beach Forward. You can always follow as well. We're on all the social media channels. But I wanted to say, I did put a link in there about some research about voters' feelings if Trump or Biden were elected. And I thought it was really interesting because I expected it to be Trump voters who'd be more angry if their candidate lost. But in fact, it's Biden voters who would be more angry according to this research. And so, I just think it's interesting when we think about, potential expressions of anger or violence after the election, like how widespread that is. We're certainly seeing some terrifying examples of violence, including like trying to run candidates' buses off the road and things like that. So we're definitely in scary times. But I don't know that that is the majority sentiment. I don't think it is. But still, there's definitely a real possibility of violence, especially, I think for me, I worry the most about if Trump loses and, he's still in office for over 2 more months and, just his denial of the results and threats to democracy. I think that's the thing that I worry about the most in this time. On the piece around communications and messaging, I think we're even seeing it right now where there's messages of helping people understand that on election night, it was unlikely that we were going to have the results of the election. And like getting that message out there early was actually important in terms of managing people's expectations about this vote is not going to probably be decided right away. And so I think communications, it goes hand in hand with organizing, with research, with, there's a lot of different components of campaigns. So if you want to get involved, my encouragement would just be start looking for organizations who work on issues that you care about and just test it out. See, if you can learn communications. I've been a spokesperson for different campaigns, so I learned a lot about that. But you can kind of figure out what you like just by trying it out, and there's a lot of room for you, I would say.
Mark?
How can we prevent the celebrity culture from encouraging itself to try to attempt to grab more power?
I love that question in the sense that I think it started in Mexico, right, where you start to see celebrities running for offices, and now you're starting to see it in the U.S. And I think that I think your question can go back tied to the last question around communication and messaging, in the sense that they take advantage of their publicity and how well they're known and name recognition. And I think when you look at campaigns, right, what are some of the successful things to check off before you run a campaign is name recognition. How well does your name sound around the community or the people that you're trying to get to vote for you? um, that's why incumbency is so important, right? That's why a lot of politicians who are in office tend to win again because they've been in office for so long that that's just a name people know. And so how do we get celebrities to back off? I think that's an interesting question in the sense that I don't know the answer to, and how do we, limit that from happening? Because one, they do have money, two, they do have name recognition, and three, they have like people following. So people are following them. So I'd be interested to hear from like Christine or Profe Lara on this question in particular. It's a really good question.
I think one thing that came, it's an idea that I learned back when I was an undergrad 20 years, and it's stuck around with me in my head because I've seen it time and time again for the most part. So data, at least back then, and I'm actually very confident still the case today. One of my professors in poli-sci shared that, time and time again, when they interview folks on attitudes on Congress, most people, right, were highly dissatisfied with Congress, highly, highly dissatisfied. But time and time again, right, more often than not, they vote for the incumbent. So it sounds counterintuitive on the surface, right? Wait, on one hand, most people just hate the institution of Congress. And so you would think, well, the way to change the institution is to change the people who get elected. But yet simultaneously, most people voted for the same. It's that name recognition. It's just part of the human psyche. Is like, if you don't know, you see if you're a Democrat, you see the stamp Democrat, you see that we might not have the time, people are busy, and you go with what your friends are saying, all that counts, right? And so, and unfortunately, I don't think that is going to change anytime soon, but having that knowledge can be helpful in kind of figuring out how to better communicate with various constituencies, right? Yeah.
Shouldn't one step would be to try to increase interaction between people who are on the upper class and the public?
It's it's a really good strategy, right? But this is where like the housing perspective comes into play, and my current understanding on how things are is like there's been attempts to do that with mixed income developments, meaning that you put rich people and lower income people to live together, and it's expected that the lower income people will learn from the rich people, right, or try to become like them. But in reality, it's like it's not looking at the barriers that are put in place by the systems in place as well. So I don't want to talk too much though, because I don't know, Christine, if you have some points to say to both of the questions from Mark, but I definitely want to open the floor. I just wanted to bring that housing perspective into it, that it has been attempted.
I think you both have covered those questions well. And I mean, I certainly think the segregation in class and race in our society fuels the inequality. Both it's created by it and fuels the inequality that we experience. I also just want to be aware of time because I know we're probably getting close. So I'm not going to talk for 5 minutes this time.
That's fine. I mean, the time is really flexible. I mean, at least in sociology club time.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I know that Dr. Lara wanted to share something about Latinx voters in this election.
Yeah, it's an emerging thought. So let me give you some context briefly, and kind of my own emerging thoughts right now is I saw, at least on social media, I haven't, like many of you, I haven't had time to really, delve into the data and the specifics yet. That's something that I'll do in the next couple of days. But something that was trending on my social media was that, Latinos in Florida and maybe even Texas, helped give Trump the win for those two particular states. And some of the conversation has been like, what do we do about this, right? What do we do? What's going on? And I like to kind of flip the paradigm, right? We do need to have conversations within the Latinx community, clearly, but to kind of complicate this a little bit better is we have to, one, recognize that the Democratic Party also has to do a heck of a lot better job in engaging Latinos. Like the onus is on the party, right? Has to be on the party to engage, energize, inform, and bring them into the fold. I don't like this idea of blaming, right, people that often get so swayed easily because of disinformation that's out there, right? And that is, to me, the onus is on the party and the better mechanisms to educate communities, such as the Latino community, not the only community. So that narrative, hopefully we can push back as well. And the other thing is, yes, there has been a rise in support in the Latino community for Trump. We've seen that in some preliminary, but again, we've got to take our time and really delve. But we also don't want to homogenize this large group, and it's an ethnicity. Latinos in Florida, some of which are Cuban, have a different set of, in general, politics and ideologies. And even that can be disaggregated even further. Younger Cubanos are more open to more progressive ideas than some of the older Cubanos. And we also have to look at these other narratives that are emerging, but the media isn't covering. What's going to give Biden the win in Arizona? I don't know if all outlets have called it, but it's looking he's going to take Arizona. Latinos, right? What about Nevada? Latinos. So I think it's too easy to scapegoat, right, Latinos, right, for giving Trump a win in certain states when we have other evidence that actually also runs counter to that. And also we need to complicate the Latino messaging. And like Latinos, we come from a variety of different backgrounds, a variety of different experiences and immigration trajectories. And some of us didn't get here, the border crossed us and so forth. So these narratives and sound bites that are out there just convince people of certain ideas that are actually may turn out to be very flawed. Right. So learn to ask questions, learn to ask critical, and then push back, because our community has a lot of political power, but a potential for much more. And I think it's up to us, if we identify with Latino, Afro-Latino, Asian Latino, because we come from so many different racial backgrounds as well. We got to keep that in mind too. To don't fall into easily these narratives that are constructed by the mass media, because they're not very accurate at times.
And Profe Lara, to add to your point about Florida, right, and understanding, right, migration patterns and understanding who is in Florida, like you said, older Cubanos who were exiled from Cuba, right, when there was the overtaking or the overturning of Cuba with Fidel Castro and him exiling people. So who are those Cubanos? They tend to be richer, whiter Cubanos that actually benefited from coming to the U.S. from Cuba. We also got to look at who else is there, Venezolanos, right, coming from what they call a dictatorship under Maduro, and their experience under that kind of government, and now coming to another country and understanding that the ways are different, but their views are very conservative in the sense that they benefit from the system. I think for me, that's where a lot of the Democrats are wrong in the way that they see Florida and Latinos. Texas in itself, right? Also, like, that's interesting because you see Arizona, right, go blue, and then it'd be interesting to see the demographics once they come out at the end of the entire vote count. But Nevada as well, there was this one video that was surfacing. I don't know if folks saw on social media of Latinos in Nevada doing a caravan in horses, right, and trucks, and rolling all down through the block, ready to go vote. But I think there was a major engagement of voters this year, of car caravans, of like, yo, let's party to the polls. Like, and then I think also due to the COVID-19 pandemic, mail-in ballots, right, being a big impact. Like, for example, the state of California governor ordered that everybody's going to get a mail-in ballot. I don't care if you register for that or not. Everybody's getting it. So I think that also plays a role in the way that people vote, like their past experiences, especially for folks who migrated to the U.S. I think that we look at, folks from like Vietnam, Cambodia, who come from, different types of governments. And then once they get to the US, they're like, well, I'm scared of tyranny. I'm scared of quote unquote socialism, right? And socialism tends to scare a lot of people. But I think, like you said, I think that it goes down to what kind of education we also do in our own communities and educating people about what it means, right, to be democratic, republican, socialist, whatever you identify as. And I think that the change has to happen maybe at one point in the US, that we become, a multiple party state that has more opportunity for new parties to rise. I don't think that's here now, right? Because we're so caught up in the Democrats and the Republicans running the show. But I think it just be very interesting to see what the final demographics were, because last election in 2016, people were blaming white women, right, for the election. And it's like, how does that play out now in 2020? And I think it'd be very interesting to see on how it goes. But also a big point to bring up is, I believe you said it, Christine, and I also saw it somewhere. 60 million people voted for Trump, I believe, here in California. Am I being correct on that statement, Christine?
I think that is nationwide. I'm like, let me see. But a lot of people voted for Trump in California too. About 835,000.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. That's LA. That's just LA County. Sorry.
In California, it's something like 60 something Biden and the rest Trump.
Yeah.
It's still a big number out here in
It's
California.
a lot. It's a lot in California. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we can't pretend that these pieces of white supremacy, of misogyny, of anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-LGBTQ, we can't pretend that they're not in California, that they're not in our communities. And I think there's like this distancing that happens when people don't have your politics. But many of us have family members who have a connection to those ideologies, maybe not fully, but some, or like our communities have those strains in them. So I think it behooves us to try to understand a bit where it's coming from so we can work to transform it. Especially like we're so divided. We're so divided as a nation of voters. We have, white supremacist groups and, throughout Southern California, throughout the United States. It's not just, in the South. So I think we need to understand really where it lives and like have a clear analysis about that it's not just out there, it is here. And we need to do what we can where we are. I always say, like, when you're feeling discouraged, do what you can where you are. Like, that's all you can do, but you can put your piece in to do what you can where you are.
I think that's a great point, Christine, and might be a good place to also sort of begin the final segment here. And do you have any resources or suggestions of how students can do that? Begin where they are, particular organizations or things going on locally here in this region that maybe they can look up or get connected to?
So we just jump in here. Earlier, I don't know how many students saw it, but I put a website. I haven't been on that website in probably over a year, so I'm assuming it's still active. It's idealist.org. It helps you search for jobs that are more social justice oriented. And so it's just a resource. I'm a believe in paid labor, so that's not always the case for some opportunities, which is problematic. But I try to pinpoint students for paid opportunities, and so that's why I do idealist.org. If you're in a situation where internships, and usually internships with college credit, like that's kind of that's better, right? When you have some exchange, right, for your work and your talents, and never undervalue yourself, right? Never do that. I think that's something that people from marginalized communities sometimes do. We don't know the value of our talents and our worth, and so that's another message that I want to impart to all of you. So college credit might be another thing that you can do. Sometimes calling up or emailing politicians, if you're interested in that sphere. They take interns, whether they're running a campaign or already in elected office. interns. In fact, I interned my freshman year for an elected official. Didn't have anyone helping me. I was pretty naive. I literally just knocked on someone's door, not knowing that that wasn't the thing to do, right? But I did. I just knock on the door, and I don't know, but it landed me an opportunity, right? It landed me an opportunity, and so yeah, just engaging in that particular way, and having folks in your own networks, right? So you all met Christine Pettit, you met me, you met Beto, you have your professor, Joy. We are now part of your network, right? And Christine shared email, Beto shared email, I shared my email, but just know that I don't want to speak for all of us, but we're friends. So, we get a lot of emails, a lot. So if you don't get to respond the first time around, just re-forward it, eventually, we'll see it. So yeah, consider us, however we can support you in connecting you to the resources, we can. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I shared our website, and I know Beto shared Libre's as well. And I would encourage people to, I guess it kind of depends where you're at, but I would say start with the city that you live in and just try to look at, okay, how are decisions made? Who represents me on the school board? Who represents me on the college board? Who represents me in city council or the commissions that we have in our city? That's one level, just to kind of understand how are decisions made. Because once you kind of start figuring out that system, look for organizations that are working on issues that you care about as well. But once you start to do that, then you really can't unlearn that knowledge. Sorry, how decisions are made. And every community is different. Some are more robust in terms of having organizing organizations. So like if you're in Los Angeles, there's a ton of organizing organizations. If you're in Long Beach, there are many, but there are fewer. If you are in a smaller community, there may or may not be organizing organizations who are doing work on the issues you care about. But you can start researching it, kind of figure that out. And like we all said, we're all happy to be a resource to you as well. If you're like, okay, I want to go in this way, I want to explore communications, or I really care about environmental justice or housing or whatever it is, I know we would love to help point you in the right direction too. So, or a direction.
I think for me, and nothing against like Christine or Profe Lara, I know both of you. It's like being the younger cat, right, in the game, being the younger person in the game, right? I'm just 26, and leading an organization has been one of the most challenging, but the most rewarding experiences I've experienced. And luckily, through my life experience, I'm able to come at it and carry that with me. But do I have long ways to go? Yeah, of course I do. But I think my biggest tip but I think that the biggest thing for me, for people is, be fearless, right? Trust yourself, believe in yourself. I think that the biggest obstacle we see sometimes is ourselves, right? Doubting ourselves and constantly saying, you know what, I can't do that or I can't be that. It's like, who said that you couldn't? Who said that you weren't meant for that, right? Take a chance on yourself, believe in yourself, and take an opportunity. Look for those opportunities. The opportunities are there, but we have to go look for them as well. And I think that the biggest thing that helped me was, believing and, creating that support system. Sometimes it's not going to be your family, it's going to be your friends, it's going to be your professors, it's going to be people that you meet through your internships. And building those relationships are so vital to the success of what happens after once you grade. Yeah, imposter syndrome being a very clear one, especially within the nonprofit sector, right? um, when we look at it, it's a changing system now, but it's because of critical conversations that have been happening and people willing to engage in those conversations. And so I believe that 10 years from now, I think that the nonprofit sector is going to be a totally different place, but it's not the solution. The solution is always going to be community and grassroots organizing and allowing ourselves to believe in one another and really creating that trust and bringing those resources to our own communities, right? Not relying on other people to do it for us, but us doing the work. And it isn't easy, right? Never give up. Never give up. When it seems like the world is coming down on you, you will find that window, and that window of light is going to guide you to your purpose. And you will find your purpose, and you know you have found your purpose when you're happy doing what you love. And so don't be afraid. You know, money is always going to be an issue for all of us, regardless if you make too much money or too little money. Money is always going to be something that people want more of. And so, regardless of what you end up doing, if you're happy there, you're going to find your happiness anywhere. And so, that's about it from me.
Thank you so much, Beto, for your words of encouragement. It really has been an honor to have you all join us today. I was very excited for this panel. And speaking of imposter syndrome, honestly, I have it all the time. I'm former Cerritos College student. And so to think that I'm, able to provide these kind of opportunities for students is really a blessing and an honor. And I pinch myself every day. So thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us in this meeting. Follow the Sociology Club on Instagram, Sociology Club Cerritos. We will be sharing the recorded link to this on YouTube. Feel free to share, rewatch. I hope you all enjoyed it. As it was stated, everyone on this panel, including the Sociology Club, myself, are a resource for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. That is definitely, shown to be, speaking of sociological research, right, shown to be the key to our success, especially when we come from, disadvantaged and marginalized backgrounds. So don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone, because that's where growth happens. So I encourage everyone to do something for yourself this week. It's a very tense week for many of us. Make sure that you're getting your sleep and that you're eating well and that you're drinking water, get a little bit of sunlight, hug those that you love that are around you, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.